Welcome back to the Kannico Agency's series, Ask the Expert. Super excited to be doing this again today, and we have our wonderful in-house resident expert, Ann Paton. I'm Kirsten Stevens, and together we're enjoying putting these things together. Last week we had Diana. I was out of town. Diana was our facilitator and host, which was fantastic. She's our behind-the-scenes queen and keeps us in line. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about annual funds. And Ann's going to share her expertise with us and kind of maybe give us some pointers and some tips on what we can be doing. First of all, what it all means and what we could be doing really on an ongoing basis, because I think, you know, I'm looking at my notes up there to myself this morning, which were about clarity, necessity, commitment, and excellence. And the first one is clarity. And if we're not clear on what an annual fund is or what we're meant to be doing, I think it just becomes this big, hazy, overwhelming concept that we just, by default, want to put aside because we're like, it's so massive. It's such a big, I have to do research. I have to figure out what it is. I have to figure out what the steps are. And I think if we can take that intimidation factor out of it and say, you know what, everybody could be doing something, right? In
Exactly.
This area. So why don't you just jump right in and tell us what on earth are annual funds? What is an annual fund? And maybe even if you could bring in a couple of little stories, like yesterday, remember when we were at breakfast with that friend of yours and we were talking about, and you were like, oh, there's no annual fund. So maybe just fill us in on a little bit of that too.
Well, this is very close to my heart because my very first job in fundraising was to run an annual fund at Dartmouth College and to also run an annual fund for the medical center at Dartmouth.
So you had never done it before.
I'd never done it before.
Perfect, because that applies to so many of us, right? So this is great. Okay.
So I had to do what all the people out there would have to do if they didn't have this forum.
Okay.
And that is do tons of research and talk to everyone I could find who had worked in the annual fund to get pointers from them. And so this is the very, very, very basics of what you need to know about the annual fund. I can tell you that it's totally worth it to work on your annual fund because it's kind of the heart and soul of everything we do in fundraising, and it's where most of your donors are going to come from. Now, I can't believe that there are organizations that don't have an annual fund because that's how I grew up and that's how I learned the rest of fundraising, that everything kind of came from that.
I find that in the institutional agencies, we hear much more about annual funds than we do in maybe more grassroots organizations or smaller nonprofits. And maybe they call it something else, but I think that it's a kind of a tried and true mechanism in institutions, and they know they cannot function without it. Whereas in nonprofits, we're still trying to learn that how important it is, right?
That's true. I think a lot of nonprofits that I see here in South Florida believe that all the money in philanthropy comes from grants, when really nationally, almost 3/4 of the money is coming from individuals. And that's why your annual fund is so important. It's kind of the heart and soul of fundraising. And what it does is very important. It makes sure that you keep your job because it's paying for the operations of your organization.
Just gonna ask you that. Awesome. Thank you for
the
reading my
day-to-day
mind.
functions of your operation are coming from the money that the annual fund brings in,
as opposed to grants,
which support
often
programs.
support programs. Okay, perfect.
So once you have your stable of annual fund donors who are supporting you because they broadly love your mission and they get to know you better, then they can begin to learn about your programs and your projects, and they by then are so committed to you that they can transfer up the ladder into major gifts. If you've done a really good job of stewarding them as annual fund donors, then they're going to stay with you from year to year. So it's very important that they continue to hear from you. And every time they hear from you, it should not be a solicitation. So
I'm not asking for money every single time I'm reaching out to them.
That's
Why?
right.
Why?
Because imagine how annoying it would be if all you ever heard from this organization that you had given your first annual gift to was another ask and another ask and another ask.
Okay, so you know now you've opened this up. What are the kinds of things that we can be doing that are not asking for money that are going to still keep us connected?
Really, really easy things.
Yeah.
You look at those donors that are in your annual fund database and you say, oh my gosh, I have something really cool that I could be telling them. And you send them a very short email that tells you about some success that you've had.
I love it. Even if it's something simple.
Very, very simple little story. Just have to share this with you. One of the boys that we've been working with just found out that he's been accepted to college at Florida State. And that's all you have to say. You could put a little picture of him there if you want to, but you don't even really need to do that. Just as long as periodically you're contacting them to let them know that something really cool has happened through the mission of your organization. If you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, you can send a monthly e-newsletter, which is very fast to put together and just has fast little snippets, like a People magazine size little stories of things that are going on in your organization. And that's a wonderful way to help donors feel good about the fact that they've supported you.
I love that. You're like, in my mind, I'm already thinking, I'm going back to my to-do list. I think I'm overdue for some of those on behalf of some of our clients. I think that we could all probably be doing a little bit of a better job of communicating more often without making it an ask. I think
well, it's really, really important to do that. I can't even tell you how many donors I've talked to that say that it just annoys them so much when all they ever hear from a nonprofit that they have wanted to support is another ask. That they really don't know what's going on.
Okay,
the annual fund is important because it allows you to let people know what is happening in the operations of your organization. You can let them know through your communications and on your website what the annual fund does for you. Because people don't really understand annual funds. Annual funds keep the lights on. Annual funds make sure that everybody that's in your organization gets paid. Annual fund, without the annual fund, your organization really couldn't exist.
Okay, so how do I know if money coming in is for my annual fund or it's just a general, like how do you define or classify what's coming in?
Well, if you have made an appeal for a project or a program, then that's usually not an annual fund donation. Your annual fund is meant to supply support for the operations of your organization. And you're making that clear when you're making the appeal. And you usually have a page on your website where people can make a donation, and you've got some narrative there about what your annual fund does for your organization.
Okay, so excellent. That makes it so much clearer. So, and what if we have a donate button and people are just donating through that donate button? Are those funds typically?
Those are annual funds.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, good. So if they're not designated, if it's not a particular campaign that you're trying to raise money for, typically the money that's coming in throughout the year is going to go into your annual fund.
Unless the person has earmarked that money for something particular within your organization, then that money goes to your annual fund.
Gotcha.
And periodically people need to be reminded what your annual fund does for your organization so they understand the importance of that broad support.
Okay.
Because typically foundations are not keen on the idea of giving to operations, so your annual fund can save your life. So if you do a really good,
annual fund can save your life.
If you do a really good job with it, that's where your major donors are going to come from. If you continue to steward those annual fund donors, you can begin to move them up the ladder.
Awesome. And Ann is so patient with me because I always, whenever we do things together, like workshops and training things, I always set up these questions that I know I've heard the answers before and I probably know some of them, but I'm trying to extract the best out of her. And I know that she knows so much. She's this deep well of information. So thank you for humoring me and answering all of my questions. All right, continue.
I like the annual fund because it gives you a chance to acquaint the people in your community with what's happening in your organization.
How so?
It's your kind of first embrace of them because you're giving them information about what your organization does broadly, and you have the opportunity through these little touches that you're doing throughout the year to keep bringing them closer.
And so if we are looking at the annual fund overall, are we expecting like first-time donors to give big gifts to the annual fund? Or, I mean, I'm assuming if they're just starting to learn about the organization and you're reaching out and you're doing some cultivation through, maybe they've signed up on an email list, right? And so now we're sending them a little e-blast periodically, and then we send a solicitation. What do you think could we expect from maybe a first-time giver to an annual fund? Are we expecting big gifts? Are we expecting it small? Maybe it grows? What do you think typically?
Well,
I mean, I know there's no typical, but just to have an idea.
It could be $100. It could be $50. It just you can't really tell. It's like, is your mission really touching that person's heart? They're not likely to send you $1,000 gift the first time out.
Okay.
It's likely to be someplace between $10 and $100, let's say, the first time around for a typical small to medium sized nonprofit. That's kind of in the range of initial annual fund gifts. But as those donors get to know you, one of the really great ways that you can increase your annual fund is to remind them what they gave last year and suggest a new amount.
Okay.
Now that takes a little bit of fiddling with your database, and so you have to have somebody in your staff who knows how to maneuver the database in a way that allows you to personalize your annual funds. But that's a really great way of increasing annual fund gifts, is to be specific about what it is that you want that person to do.
I think when we think also, just back to the amounts thing that I just mentioned, I feel like it's more symbolic than anything else to have people, even if they're giving small amounts, you're getting people on your side. It doesn't matter if it's $10, $50, $100, right? You're raising awareness, you're getting people's buy-in, even if it's at a low level. I mean, that means that then you have potential there to cultivate them and grow them over time into potentially bigger donors.
One really cool thing that you can do with your volunteers too is, as your annual fund gifts come in, you can get volunteers to call those annual fund donors and just say thank you. And you would not believe how shocked people are. Even if you're just leaving a message on their voicemail, we got your gift of $50 today. We're so happy that you've joined our donors. Thank you so much. They can't believe that you've taken the time to do that, because so few organizations do. And it makes your volunteers feel good to be able to say thank you. It's a really nice way of using them. So
saying thank you is so much fun.
It is fun.
Right? It's fun.
And if you actually get somebody on the phone, that's even more fun. Because then you hear the surprise in their voice that you're calling to say thanks, and that can just be a wonderful moment.
Good. What else? What have we not talked about? Is there anything else we still need to cover on annual funds?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things. One is that a lot of people only do one annual appeal a year, and they usually do it right around tax time. That's the most popular time to do it. I always caution people not to wait until the middle of December to send out your letter, because guess what happens? How much mail do we get in our mailbox in December?
A ton. Ridiculous amount.
All the third class stuff, all the catalogs, all the everything. People stand over their recycling bins and throw stuff away. So you need to try to separate yourself from all that stuff. You need to do your mailing early, and you need to make it look as personal as possible. I always like to tell people, put a live stamp on your annual fund appeal.
So a real stamp as opposed to getting the metered thing.
Have your volunteers sit down and hand address your annual fund appeal. If you can get people to do that, you can have an addressing party, and that turns out to be really fun a lot of times. Sushi,
sake, and addressing envelopes.
Yes,
why
exactly.
not?
Doesn't that sound great?
That sounds fun.
Can we have that?
Yes, please. Yeah, why not? I agree with you. And I think those little personal touches, anything that's going to get someone more inclined to open an envelope. Your suggestion of green or red envelopes over the holidays, or any other color besides white, I completely support as well, because I'm always intrigued when it comes in a different color, and I figure it's probably something more personal. So 3 takeaways for me would be a different colored envelope, a stamp, and then maybe hand addressing.
If you can.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, you can do another appeal. You can do a spring appeal.
Sure.
And then there's always this opportunity. Let's say you set an annual fund goal, which I always tell people is a good idea to do. We're going to try to raise $200,000 this year through the annual fund. It's coming to the end of let's say your fiscal year ends on June 30th.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming to the end of your fiscal year. What are you going to do? You haven't met your goal.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back to the people who already gave to you in that fiscal year and say, we're this far from reaching our goal. With your help, you could put us over the top, which would allow us to do X. And almost 20% of people will give a second annual fund gift.
Wow. So people aren't necessarily offended by it. They understand that you have a goal and you're trying to meet it, and you're seeing if anyone else is willing to give a second gift.
Yes, and nearly 20% of the people do, so it's certainly worth it. Now,
That's
I
incredible.
wouldn't do that if you haven't been sending people nice little messages during the year. If all you've done is solicit them,
then we're
don't
back to
ask
square
them again.
one, how we started this conversation,
That's right,
which is
exactly.
don't just keep asking.
Right, right.
Okay, well, good. What else? Anything else? Any last thoughts for us? And then maybe we can do a little roundup of the things we talked about.
It might be important for us to talk about the steps.
Yes.
We talked already about setting a goal. I always think that that's a really good idea.
Okay, so set a goal.
Right. And
even if it's conservative.
It can be
maybe
very
it's 50,000.
conservative the first time around.
Perfect.
Establish a team. So if you don't have an annual fund group in your nonprofit, who are the best people to work on this with you? Who's the person who's going to do the database work? Who's the person who's going to write the letter? So that you have your little group together. Who are the people who are going to call to say thank you?
And by the way, sorry to interrupt, but it could be anyone. I had my mom help with thank you letters for a campaign that we did where we were all volunteers, and my mom helped out. So mom wanted to chip in. This was for the Bahamas for the relief efforts. So I think be creative too, because if you have a great friend who's willing to sit with you and do some of this, it doesn't have to be a volunteer, staff member, or a board member, right? It could be someone else.
It can be anybody.
It can be anybody. Okay.
Great way to bring in someone off the street and get them involved.
Get them off the
in
street.
your organization.
Put them to work.
Right.
Okay. What else?
Create a timeline for
Yes.
your appeal. And really stick to that, so you don't end up doing things at the last minute and making mistakes, like putting things in the wrong envelope if you're personally
or being too much
addressing-
in a hurry.
Right.
Yep.
When those mistakes happen, they tend to really diminish the effectiveness of your campaign. So give yourself time. Analyze your donor database if you're going to segment your audience so you have more personal messages for people at the top of the range.
Yep.
Create a giving page on your website if you don't have one. That's really, really important, because a lot of people like to give online now.
I mean, that for an organization that doesn't have that could almost be like the first place to start.
Right.
Put that, and then you can say you even have an annual fund because you put it on your website.
Right. That can be your very first step. And I have lots of information about that if we want to talk about it next time.
Good.
Then you can launch your campaign. You can let people know on your website. You can let them know on social media. Our annual fund appeal is coming. Please watch for it, kind of thing.
Okay.
I talk always about thanking donors. Please, please, please do that, and do it quickly. You should try to send your acknowledgments out. We used to always try to send our acknowledgments out within 48 hours of the time that we had gotten a gift, because it's another way for people to feel really good and understand how grateful you are.
The sooner the better. I agree. Yep.
And keep tracking your progress so that you can report to your board on your annual fund appeal. Here's how many gifts that we got that were over $50. This is our first time out. Isn't that great? And then
so easy to forget that part, but you're right. You do need to track it.
And it's great to be able, something wonderful to be able to share that with your board, because it shows your success.
I love your little notes here. I see a download in our future. Diana, our Chief Creative Director, who's behind the scenes here, I kind of see a little download here with these steps, because you did this so beautifully with set a goal, establish the team, create a timeline, analyze your database, create a giving page on your website, launch the campaign, thank your donors, and number 8, track your progress and keep going. So beautifully put together, Annie. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Any last thought?
If you don't have an annual fund, please start one now.
Yes, don't waste any time. Just get started, right?
Right.
And think about the touch points, because those are easy. And they can be organic. You could just come in one day and say, you know what, we had this great event over the weekend. Let me share it with a handful of our potential donors, right? Let me send a little personal email. So there are ways that you can do those touches without always asking for
And
money.
people love it.
People love it, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're so
Ann Paton.
welcome.
We
You're
love
so
having
welcome.
you here as our senior advisor to help us, and we thank you again so much for joining us for the Ask the Expert series. It's always fun to pick the brain of someone who's got so much knowledge to share with us and kind of collaborate on these things. And of course, we want you to please remember, I've got my list of to-dos behind Diana's shoulder to remind me. So if I look that way, that's what I'm doing. Join our free community forum. We're going to put the link in the description. That forum is growing. We're putting a lot of our resources in there. So make sure that you go onto the forum and you like it or join it or subscribe to it. I'm not sure what one does, but you'll know better than I do. But please go to the free community forum. Take advantage of everything that's in there because it is free. We want this to be available to you and to the entire community. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be loading this video and many others, and we will be doing our Ask the Expert series every Friday. So take a look, keep an eye out for that. And then also, of course, visit our website, Kannico.com, for any free resources that you may be missing. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, we do send those out in an e-blast every week. So it's kind of spoon-fed to you, or you can go into the website and look up the resources. So thank you again so much for joining us. It's Kirsten Stevens from the Kannico Agency and Ann Paton today with the Ask the Expert. Thank you.